It started with two shadowy figures watching me from across the street, their faces hidden in darkness. I brushed it off the first time, but they returned, always standing in the same spot, always watching. I work as a security guard at a mid-sized office building in the heart of the city. Around here, crime rates are pretty high, so companies often face significant losses from nighttime break-ins. Usually, I work with a partner, but this month, I was on my own while a new employee was being trained. Although being alone could get boring and made it tough to stay alert, I didn't mind. Sometimes, a partner could be more distracting than helpful. 2 weeks into the month, while patrolling the lot as usual, I noticed two men across the street. They were standing in the shadows, facing my direction. I couldn't tell if they were watching me or the building, but it left me uneasy. Later, when I passed the area again, they were gone. I shrugged it off and finished my shift without incident. A few nights later, I spotted the same two men in the same spot. Their presence made me uneasy again. So instead of continuing my rounds, I lingered on that side of the building, pacing visibly. I hoped that if they knew I'd seen them, they might leave. After about 5 minutes, they walked away. I watched them go, then stayed outside for another 10 minutes to make sure they didn't return. Feeling more at ease, I headed to the break room for lunch. It was around 1 a.m., and the break room was at the far end of the building. As I ate and scrolled through my phone, I heard an unfamiliar noise. It was faint but unsettling. I walked to the hallway door and stood there, listening intently. After a while, everything went quiet, and I convinced myself it was nothing. Later, while reviewing security footage out of curiosity, I decided to patrol again. Outside, everything seemed normal, just the buzz of streetlights breaking the silence. When I returned inside, I noticed the padlock on the stairwell's emergency exit had been snapped in half. The door had been forced open. Feeling a surge of panic, I rushed back to the office and reviewed the footage. The two men I'd seen outside had circled to the rear of the building while I was watching them earlier. They broke in and entered the workrooms. Disturbingly, they had been inside the building the entire time. The noise I'd heard earlier? One of them accidentally bumped into a desk. The footage revealed the men carried weapons, possibly large knives or firearms. If I had encountered them face to face, it could have turned deadly. The police took the footage, but the quality was poor, and the men's faces were obscured. To this day, no one knows who they were or why they targeted the building. I worked the night shift at a hospital's ER, managing the front desk and checking in patients. The nights are unpredictable, with the occasional influx of chaos, but some shifts are eerily calm. This particular night started off quietly. My coworker Amy and I chatted about random topics to pass the time. At around 2 a.m., Amy went on her break to grab something from the cafeteria, leaving me alone at the desk. Not even a minute after she left, a man walked in through the front doors. He wore a black hoodie and jeans, his hair messy and unkempt, like he'd either just woken up or hadn't showered in days. There was something about him. His demeanor made my skin crawl. He approached the desk slowly and asked for a woman by name, something like Hannah Smith. I didn't recognize the name, but I checked the records just in case. There wasn't anyone admitted under that name. I told him so and suggested he try other nearby hospitals. He nodded awkwardly, muttered a thank you, and left. As he walked out, I exchanged a glance with the security guard stationed across the room. Without a word, we both silently acknowledged how strange the man had been. Amy returned shortly after, and the rest of the shift was uneventful. At 4 a.m., I clocked out and headed to the parking lot. The hospital's lot is enormous, with employee parking located at the very back to leave space for patients closer to the entrance. As I walked to my car, an uneasy feeling crept over me, and my mind flashed back to the man from earlier. The night was eerily silent, and my paranoia urged me to walk faster. I reached my car, tossed my bag on the passenger seat, and drove off. The empty road stretched ahead of me, but that sense of being watched lingered. I kept checking my mirrors, but no cars were following me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I parked, stepped out, and walked toward the house. I hadn't even locked the door behind me when I heard footsteps running up the porch. Someone shook the handle violently, trying to get in. My heart sank. Then I heard a voice.
"Excuse me, ma'am. I need help. Please open the door."
It was the man from the hospital. Terrified, I silently called the police. The moment I hit the dial, he bolted. I peeked through the peephole and saw him running down the street into the darkness. When the police arrived, they shared something chilling. The back door of my car had been left wide open. He'd been hiding in my back seat the entire drive home. The officers reviewed hospital CCTV and identified him a few days later. He'd been stalking me for weeks, figuring out which car I drove. I'd likely left my car unlocked just long enough for him to slip inside. Though he was arrested, he never admitted to anything beyond wanting to talk. That night changed how I approach safety, and I'm grateful I survived unharmed. In my mid-20s, I worked night shifts at a 7-Eleven while attending online classes. The job was quiet enough for me to focus on schoolwork during the long hours. Most nights, I was alone, and the store rarely got busy. This particular evening was cold and rainy, perfect for keeping customers away. I had my laptop out and was buried in assignments for nearly 2 hours when the door opened and a man walked in. He looked to be in his 30s with a short beard and close-cropped hair. I set my laptop aside and waited as he wandered the aisles for a few minutes. Then, without buying anything, he left. I thought little of it and returned to my schoolwork. About 30 minutes later, headlights caught my attention. The same car had returned and the same man stepped out. This time, he walked straight to the counter and asked if he could use the restroom. I pointed him in the right direction, confused but polite. The restroom was a single occupancy room, and I expected him to be quick. But after a few minutes, he still hadn't come out. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I didn't want to seem intrusive, but it was unusual. At that moment, a police car pulled into the lot. The officer circled the man's car before stopping behind it. With a tense expression, he entered the store and asked who the car belonged to. I pointed to the restroom and explained the man had been inside for over 20 minutes. The officer wasted no time. He knocked on the restroom door, demanding the man come out. After a minute of silence, the officer asked me for the key. Shaky, I retrieved it and handed it over. He unlocked the door and opened it, weapon drawn, but the restroom was empty. Shocked, I stammered out that the man had gone in and never left. The officer glanced around and noticed the ceiling tiles. It was one of those paneled ceilings you could push aside to access the space above. Backup arrived, and within 15 minutes, they found the man hiding in the ceiling. He was arrested on the spot. Later, I learned he was on the run after committing horrific crimes earlier that night. His victims had all been alone, much like me. To this day, I don't know if he was hiding from the police or if I'd narrowly avoided becoming his next victim. Either way, I'm grateful he was caught before anyone else could get hurt.